Everything you own arrived on a lorry. Your food, your clothes, your home. 98% of it. But the trucks are stopping. The drivers are leaving, and what's replacing them could cause the biggest supply chain crisis this country has ever seen. This is what happens when government policy breaks an industry that the entire economy depends on. For decades, British haulage was simple. You owned a truck, you found freight, you made a living. The system wasn't perfect, but it moved goods. Then two things happened that changed everything. The first was January 31st, 2020, Brexit. Britain left the European Union. With it came borders, forms, customs delays. Before this, a driver could cross from the UK into France without stopping. Now there were checkpoints. The government said this was temporary, that border systems would be in place by January 2021. They weren't. By the time 2022 came, the systems still weren't ready. The government kept pushing dates back. July 2022 became October 2023. October 2023 became April 2024. April 2024 became later in 2025. This wasn't a small problem. This was a fundamental break in how British trade worked. The numbers show what happened. In 2017, the UK exported 106.4 million tonnes to the EU. By 2024, that fell to 90.3 million tonnes. That's a 15% decline. Not because British companies stopped trading, but because crossing the border became so difficult that many gave up. Customs declarations that used to be simple now needed paperwork for every item, safety and security forms, health certificates. Each shipment added hours of delay. For a haulage company being paid per mile, not per hour, delays meant losses. The government estimated the cost at £469 million per year, every year, just from customs compliance. But there was a human cost too. The EU drivers who came to Britain to work started leaving. They couldn't face the border delays. They didn't want to deal with new regulations. By 2024, the exodus was clear. The shortage of drivers jumped from 30,000 in 2019 to 100,000 by 2021. Some improved after that, but by 2025, it was still 50,000 drivers short. Then something else happened that nobody planned for. In March 2020, COVID hit. The government told haulage companies that they were essential. Drivers were heroes, but the industry needed help. So the government suspended the HGV levy. This was a tax on lorries. Suspending it saved companies money when they needed it most. That made sense at the time. But here's what happened next. The suspension was supposed to be temporary. Yet when COVID ended and the economy restarted, the government kept the levy suspended. For years, drivers got trained. Supply chains slowly recovered. Life moved forward. Then in August 2023, the government brought the levy back. The levy had been announced years earlier in the 2022 autumn statement, but the government refused to extend the suspension when the economy recovered. It was sudden. A company that had been operating without paying this tax for 3 years suddenly had to pay again. For a 44-tonne articulated lorry, that was £749 a year for older vehicles and £576 for newer ones. The timing was terrible. Companies were already struggling. The driver shortage was real. Fuel prices were volatile. And now another cost landed on their books. But the government wasn't done. Between 2022 and 2024, something strange happened. Everything got more expensive at once. Fuel prices stayed high. Diesel was around 143 pence per litre in 2024 and 2025. For a haulage company, fuel is about a third of all costs. When it's high, profits disappear. When it's low, they can breathe. This cost was beyond anyone's control. Insurance premiums shot up. Claims were expensive, repair costs climbed. A company that spent 7% more on insurance in 2023 spent even more in 2024. Some companies saw insurance bills jump by 10% or more. Then wages. To attract and keep drivers, companies had to pay more. The median HGV driver wage jumped from around £15 per hour in 2023 to between £17.50 and £18.50 in 2025. That's a surge driven by severe shortages and inflation. Drivers deserved it. But it squeezed companies further. The government also raised vehicle excise duty. This is road tax. They had frozen it since 2014. Then in the autumn budget 2024, they said all HGV tax rates would rise from April 2025, in line with inflation at 3.6%. Let me be clear about what happened here. In 2023, the Road Haulage Association conducted a survey. They asked companies about their costs. The data showed something shocking. The cost of running a single 44-ton articulated lorry had gone up 9.2% in just 1 year. Not because of one thing, because every single cost went up at the same time. But here's the part that broke companies. The profit margin is only 2%, maybe 3% in good years. Now it had dropped to 1.58%. Think about that business model. You buy a truck worth £45,000. You employ drivers at £15.78 per hour. You pay fuel. You pay insurance. You pay maintenance. You pay taxes. And after all of that, your profit is less than 2% of revenue. One bad month, one broken engine, one late customer payment, and you're making a loss. In 2023, 494 haulage companies went into insolvency. In 2021, that number was 260. In 2024, the full year total hit 471 closures. Over 3 years, more than 1,800 haulage companies have simply vanished. In the first half of 2024, another 170 companies closed. And this wasn't ending. By September 2025, companies were collapsing regularly, 7 in a single month. The data revealed something even worse. The Office for National Statistics found that 36.8% of transport and logistics companies had zero emergency cash reserves. They were operating with nothing. One shock and they're gone. While all this was happening with money and costs, something else was breaking. The people who actually drive the lorries. The average HGV driver is 51 years old. That's not a problem by itself. The problem is what comes next. 55% of all drivers are between 50 and 65. They will retire in the next 10 years. The industry needs 40,000 new drivers every single year just to replace them and keep up with demand. That's 200,000 new drivers needed in the next 5 years. Last year, how many new drivers did the industry get? Not enough. Less than half what's needed. The government launched something called the Skills Bootcamp in 2022. It trained people to be HGV drivers. The scheme was working. Thousands of people got trained and qualified. The program was extended through March 2026, but funding responsibility shifted from central government to local authorities. Most hadn't set aside adequate funding. Training expansion stalled as a result. Meanwhile, the government kept immigration rules tight. HGV driving wasn't just a labour shortage. Companies that wanted to sponsor foreign drivers faced high salary requirements under the points-based system. Most haulage firms couldn't afford the sponsorship costs, so they couldn't bring in workers from abroad. Between 2016 and 2024, the number of EU nationals working as HGV drivers in Britain fell sharply. Some returned in 2024, but barriers remained high. The shortage that started in 2019 with 30,000 missing drivers became 100,000 by 2021. Even with improvements, it was still 50,000 in 2025. This wasn't just bad for companies. It was bad for customers, bad for supply chains, bad for the economy. By 2024, the government introduced a new layer of rules, clean air zones. These are areas in cities where old, polluting lorries can't enter without paying a charge. 8 major cities now have them: London, Birmingham, Bristol, Bath, Bradford, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Aberdeen, Dundee. More are coming. In London, a non-compliant HGV pays £12.50 per day. In Birmingham, it's £50. In Bristol, HGVs pay up to £100 per day. For a haulage company doing deliveries across multiple cities, these charges add up. A company making 250 deliveries per year across multiple zones could be paying tens of thousands of pounds in zone charges alone, on top of everything else. The government also set a target. All new HGVs under 26 tonnes must be zero emission by 2035. That's 11 years away. It sounds ambitious. The reality is it's impossible. Today, zero-emission lorries make up less than 2% of the market. In the first half of 2025, only 183 zero-emission HGVs were sold. By the end of 2025, that full-year figure reached 587 units. Still only 1.4% of the market. Why? They cost too much. They need charging infrastructure that doesn't exist. The government also set targets. All new HGVs under 26 tonnes must be zero emission by 2035. Heavier 44-tonne trucks have until 2040. That's 11 and 14 years away. It sounds ambitious. The reality is it's impossible. Some companies looked at hydrogen. It's being tested. It could work for long distance. But the infrastructure isn't there yet. The government estimated that new safety requirements add £3,500 to the cost of each new vehicle. Add that to the cost of going electric. Add that to the cost of grid connection. Add that to the cost of buying new equipment. In 2025, while the government pushed for a green revolution, UK commercial vehicle production plummeted by 62%. Total HGV registrations fell by 10% as companies froze investment. The total net worth of the haulage sector fell from £6.8 billion in August 2024 to £5.9 billion by February 2025. That's a 12% collapse in 6 months. Companies were selling equipment, reducing fleets, holding back on investment, not because business was good and they wanted to shrink, because they didn't know if they'd survive next year. The government classified haulage as essential. 89% of all goods moved by lorry, 98% of food. The industry contributes 5.6% of UK GDP, £13.6 billion per year, hundreds of thousands of jobs. There are 58,000 haulage companies operating in the UK and 437,000 registered HGVs, but that number of companies is falling at 4% every 6 months. There's another hidden cost nobody talks about: freight crime. In 2024 alone, £111.5 million worth of goods were stolen from lorries. That's real revenue gone. Real losses for companies and customers. In the automotive sector, 183,000 people depend on commercial vehicle manufacturing. That industry is shrinking as production collapses, but policy after policy made it harder to operate. Brexit created border chaos, fuel prices stayed high, wages had to increase, taxes increased, environmental rules came faster than companies could adapt, parking was never enough, driver training stalled, and nobody planned any of it. The system didn't break because it was bad. It broke because government policy never considered what the impacts would be. Since 2022, over 1,800 haulage companies have vanished. Today, drivers are retiring faster than they can be replaced. Companies are closing faster than new ones start. Costs keep rising. Profit margins keep shrinking. And the one thing this entire economy depends on is quietly dying. When the lorries stop moving, that's when people will notice. That's when supply chains break. That's when the real crisis begins. By then, it might be too late.